War between the United States, Israel and Iran has entered a dangerous new phase as a critical deadline set by the US President Donald Trump draws closer. At 8 p.m. EST on Tuesday, Trump's ultimatum to Iran is set to expire, demanding that Tehran reopens the Strait of Hormuz and accept a series of security conditions or face massive new strikes. Now, at the same time, reports suggest that regional mediators are racing to put together a last-minute proposal for a 45-day ceasefire to halt the fighting and avert what officials on all sides privately describe as a potential D-Day in the conflict. The outcome will shape not only the war but also the global economy. So today in this edition of From the News Desk, we will tell you what exactly is this 45-day peace plan and also what happens if Trump's deadline ends with no deal with Iran. Well, Trump's deadline is the latest in series of escalatory threats after weeks of US and Israeli strikes on Iranian military targets, bases on allied militia and parts of Iran's energy network. Now the US president insists that Iran must fully reopen the Strait of Hormuz to commercial shippings, allow the safe passage for oil tankers and most importantly, cease any harassment or attacks on vessels in the Gulf. Remember, this narrow waterway between Iran and Oman handles more than 1/5 of global seaborne oil trade, meaning any prolonged disruption sends shockwaves through energy markets in Asia, Europe, and also in the United States. In fact, US officials have argued that Iran has used the strait as leverage for many years, pointing to past incidents in 2019 and later attacks on oil tankers and drones near the waterways that sharply raised tensions and briefly pushed oil prices up. In fact, in his latest speeches, Trump has gone beyond demanding freedom of navigation in this very strait. He has warned that if Iran fails to comply with the deadline, the United States hit the country extremely hard and bring them back to the Stone Age by targeting power plants, oil facilities, and other critical infrastructure. Such language revives a Cold War era phrase that signals the potential destruction of systems that underpin modern life, from electricity and fuel to bridges, ports and communication networks. The message from Washington is that Iran must choose between reopening the strait and accepting tighter monitoring measures or risking strikes that could cripple its already fragile economy. Now, against this tense backdrop, mediators from the Gulf and Asia are quietly promoting a 45-day ceasefire plan before the deadline expires. While not officially published, but such proposals usually try to freeze military operations on all sides while opening a window for talks on long-term arrangements. In fact, reports suggest that this proposed plan is structured in two phases. Phase 1 will include temporary ceasefire and Phase 2 will see settlement via negotiations. Now, reports also indicate that this 45-day pause would likely require Iran to halt missile and drone launches against US forces, Israel and Gulf state, and also to stop any new interference with shipping in and around the Strait of Hormuz, with talks on Iran's uranium enrichment program. In return, the United States and Israel would be expected to suspend further large-scale strikes on Iranian territory and major infrastructure, while allowing limited humanitarian and commercial flows to continue. In fact, a monitored ceasefire might also include practical steps to reduce miscalculation at sea and in the air. Now, economic incentives may be also part of this very package, such as limited access to frozen funds or targeted sanctions relief tied to compliance over the 45-day period, though any broader lifting of sanctions would remain highly contentious in Washington. Now, even a short pause is very valuable because it cools tempers, gives civilians breathing space, and creates time to test whether the parties involved in this conflict are serious about avoiding further escalation. The most alarming scenario is that Tuesday's deadline passes without a ceasefire or any sort of agreement. In that case, Trump's own words point to a wave of strikes aimed not only at Iran's remaining military assets, but also at civilian and energy infrastructure, including electricity grids, refineries, oil export terminals, and key bridges. Military analysts warn that such an operation, layered on top of the damage already done in recent weeks, could severely disrupt Iran's ability to generate power, move goods, and most importantly, export oil, plunging ordinary Iranians deeper into hardship. And because a larger share of global oil and liquefied natural gas still moves through the Strait of Hormuz, even the threat of further fighting there would likely send energy prices sharply higher and rattle financial markets worldwide further. Now, there is also a real risk of the conflict widening beyond its current fronts. Iran could respond to a new barrage of US and Israeli strikes by intensifying attacks on tankers, ports, and pipelines across the region, drawing in Gulf monarchies and potentially threatening shipping routes from the Red Sea to the Eastern Mediterranean. Another part is that Hezbollah, Houthis, and other allied groups might also open additional fronts against Israel, while US bases from Iraq to the Indian Ocean could come under heavy fire, forcing Washington to choose between escalation and withdrawal. Now, each additional strike or retaliation would make it harder for any leader to back down without appearing weak, raising the danger of miscalculation. And at the same time, even as they talk tough, US officials, including President Trump, continues to signal that they prefer a negotiation outcome, not an endless war. Well, for now, everything hinges on whether Tehran and Washington, with the help of mediators, can find a narrow path that combines reopening of Strait of Hormuz, some form of temporary ceasefire, and most importantly, a face-saving formula for both the sides. But if they fail, the world could wake up after Tuesday's deadline to a far more dangerous Middle East and a new shock to the global economy.